Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so very much for joining me this evening, wherever you are in the world. And let's get started with tonight's story, but before I do, I want to send you loads and loads of love, and I hope you're doing very, very well. And let me remind you that if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, I live in Spokane, Washington, in a beautiful river retreat home, overlooking a stunning silvery lake, and surrounded by mountainous valleys and plenty of natural forest. So I live much closer to nature than most out here, because when I open my front door, I am truly out in the country. I moved to this part of the world 20 years ago after my company relocated me from California, and I must say I've never ever looked back. My family just loves it out here, and the people in this part of the world are so easygoing and friendly, and when we moved here we were welcomed by the entire community. I love living in this part of the world because the climate is relatively kind to us, with summers that don't get too hot, and you only get a week or two with 90 degrees temperatures, so it's not really that bad. Also, fall in this part of the world is utterly magnificent, with all the golden colours and beautiful pink tones that make the scenic views around here visually breathtaking. And of course, we usually get a beautiful white Christmas, and who wouldn't want that? We have a motto in this part of the world that goes, near nature, near perfect, which really does align perfectly with where I live. We have close access to nature all year round, from hiking, fishing, camping, bowling, water skiing, and of course, skiing. People love living out here, who move from other states because of the lower cost of living, lower housing costs, smaller population, and so much less congestion on the roads. My Bigfoot encounter happened last year during the winter storm called Maya, where the governor called a state of emergency in Washington state. There was a ground blizzard all over Washington, Seattle, and the Pacific Northwest. I remember how bitterly cold it was. There were temperatures like minus 40s, 50s, and even 60s in some parts. I also heard on the news that one poor guy had been left stranded in his car for 2 weeks, but survived because he had food supplies and a gallon of water in his car. I remember here in Spokane it was absolutely freezing, and the whole place was literally blanketed in thick luminescent white snow, and there were hefty snowdrifts absolutely everywhere, and those punneling winds were so vicious and treacherous that even light cars were being pushed over in the area and sliding all over the place. It was too dangerous for us to go outdoors, and especially to drive in those hazardous conditions. I decided that my family would remain snowed in until the dangerous weather actually subsided. I'm fortunate in my job to work from home, and so my cosy, sumptuous home was filled with lovely, warm, crackling fires. My domesticated wife spent her time making us delicious thick soups and plenty of delicious hot chocolates. The kids also roasted marshmallows over the fire and kept occupied with all kinds of board games, plenty of Netflix, and of course watching all kinds of YouTube videos that always keeps them happily entertained, I'm glad to say. One day as I was sitting in my study on the computer, I looked up to see the gargantuan white silvery form walking past my window and looking in at me. It happened so swiftly, I almost thought I imagined it, until I went outside and saw a large trail of footsteps leading to the woods, and they were big. I measured the footprints and they were 17 inches long and 10 inches wide. I knew the creatures were not human, and as far as my window was concerned, it was 7 feet off the ground, so this creature, whatever it was, I believe was gargantuan. Despite the howling winds and relentless heavy snow, and also the fact that I was physically struggling to brace the punneling punches of this very unkind weather, curiosity got the better of me, and I was determined to follow the footsteps, much to my wife's disapproval. "You cannot go out there," she cried. "You could slip or fall. It's treacherous out there." "I won't be long," I assured her. "I just want to check out on something." I never told her exactly what, though. I will not forget the expression on her face when I reached for my rifle. "What's going on?" she asked. "What did you see out there?" I did not answer her, but slammed the door behind me, and I could feel her watching me with anxious brown eyes as I ventured out into the snow. I followed the footsteps, which came to an abrupt end, just like that. Truly, I'd never been able to work that one out, but that is what I saw. So unless the animal went shooting up into the sky, I have absolutely no clue what happened, because the trail came to an abrupt and sudden end, and the snow from then onwards had not been touched. It was very peculiar, to say the least. I decided not to turn back home, but to investigate further, despite the aggressive, unrelenting winds that pounded my body with their forceful, hammering fists. I found myself coming to a clearing in the woods, where I noticed this exceedingly large igloo-like structure well concealed behind the trees. I would have very easily overlooked it, but somehow I managed to see it. I immediately went to inspect the structure, which smelt rank inside, and the ground was covered with lots of soft hay. It looked like some creature was using this place like a nest, and I must admit I got some relief myself from inside the structure against the hounding outside elements that were growing more vicious and hostile every single second. It seemed like the weather was getting more and more worse. This was not funny, I thought. I shouldn't have come out here in these atrocious conditions. Now I would have to brace myself getting back into the house, and I knew it would be a hazardous challenge, even just walking a short way. The igloo-like structure provided a huge amount of relief from the horrendous weather, even if the smell was pretty rank. Suddenly I saw a large, white, hairy creature entering the igloo, and when she turned around, she stopped dead in her tracks, looking at me with a look of total surprise and disbelief all over her primate-like face. I think she was more horrified to see me taking shelter in her igloo than I was in actually seeing her. At that moment I did not know what on earth this creature was, that appeared very human in her mannerisms, expressions, and gestures. Yet I knew that I was staring at an apex predator. It was like I was standing with a polar bear in his den, and you can imagine how terrifying that would feel in such a terrifying scenario. You would feel certain that your time was running out very, very shortly for your life on this earth. This was far worse than that, and I was almost certain I was going to be easy pickings for this creature. What had I been thinking, staying in her den like this, I wondered? Did I have some kind of macabre death wish, or what? My rifle was nothing against this thing, and I felt the sense of hopelessness and impending dread engulf my body with a paralyzing fear. I was almost certain that I was a dead man, living on a few more seconds of borrowed time. I could tell the creature was female because of her hairy breasts. I promise you this, though. She was an ample 9 foot tall, and between 9 to 1,000 pounds in weight, and about a hefty 4.5 feet wide. From top to toe she was covered with white fur, with silver tips that were all over her body, except on her hands and her face. Her face was human-like, and her eyes were kind and gentle, although very confused. The creature cocked her conical head to one side and looked at me curiously with wide-open, brown-yellow eyes. Suddenly she turned around to retrieve a bundle from the igloo door that I had failed to notice before. It was a small youngling of only about 2 foot tall, which she cradled lovingly in her arms. Now I was really in trouble, I thought. There was nothing more dangerous than an apex predator with her cub. Could this situation have got any worse? Now my life really was hanging in the balance. I could feel my heart racing violently through my chest, and I just wanted to run, but I couldn't. It was like I was frozen and paralyzed to the spot, because I was so terrified. I have faced a bear in the wild before, in a very precarious situation, but never once have I felt as incapacitated by fear as I did now. The little cub looked at me curiously and made a strange, cute chattering sound to its mother. And she seemed amused by them, because I could have sworn that she actually smiled. All the time this humanoid ape-like creature studied me with her curious eyes, while she played with her cub's silvery hair, almost as if she was brushing it with her fingers. She chattered to the creature like a mother would on a train while sitting next to a stranger. That is exactly what it felt like. Even though this creature was impressively imposing and very intimidating, it would have been so easy for her to snap my neck with one of her hands, but I'm glad to say that she didn't, nor did she even try. Not once did she give off a negative vibe or even appear remotely aggressive in any way, despite the fact that I was expecting her to lash out at me very suddenly like a striking serpent, but she never did. All the time she remained calm and serene. Even though my presence had come as a shock to her and an inconvenience, she probably didn't want to share her igloo with me, but she never once expressed any displeasure towards me being there. For a creature so elusive, she was incredibly accepting and forgiving. She reached into her straw bed and pulled out a squirrel which she tore into 3 pieces, offering me one of them as a way of sharing and then she shared the rest with her cub. I took the piece of squirrel, and as they started to chew, I pretended to join them by chomping my jaws up and down, as if I was finding the squirrel as tasty as they appeared to be. She looked up at me, seemingly pleased that I accepted her offering. When I was a young boy, my mother had always taught me to eat what I was offered by a guest, even if it appeared to be vile. She told me that the Queen of England would do that, and so should I. I was told that if I refused the dish, I would cause offence to my hosts. In this situation, it felt no different, so I pretended to eat the squirrel, but I tucked it secretly into my little pocket. I could see the creature physically relax, and then she stretched out her long body on the hay with her little cub against her chest, and rolled back on the hay as if about to go to sleep. She gestured for me to do the same, because there was a lot of space in that igloo. I lay back on the hay and pretended to go to sleep, letting out a few snores that were all part of my act. The creature went to sleep quickly, and I could hear her gentle snores, and once again I felt safe, and I retreated out of that igloo feeling grateful to be alive. Things could have turned out so differently, I thought. You may wonder why I didn't retreat from the igloo immediately when the creature entered it in the first place. That's a very good question, and my answer is that I was so stunned by what I was seeing that I just could not move my body in any way. It was like I was completely paralyzed to the spot. And in this creature's presence, I also didn't want to upset her, and I sensed that if I did, she could potentially be quite dangerous. I just listened to my gut, I suppose, which is what you need to do in any potentially dangerous situation. I returned home to the furious, unforgiving wrath of my wife, after bracing the formidable elements outside in the snow, and even falling over a few times. My wife was not pleased with me, and scolded me for being away for so long, and causing her so much overdue concern. She also told me to soak in a hot bath, because I was freezing cold, and shaking uncontrollably, and stinking to high heaven of something unmentionable. Well, that's what she told me anyway. It took me a long time to get over my encounter with the creature. I now know that I encountered a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or a Yeti. I would never have expected to see a creature like this in my own home turf, and it was more unusual than most Bigfoot sightings because the creature was as white as snow, and in my opinion, brighter and more luminescent than a polar bear, so she was perfectly camouflaged. I do consider myself to be privileged to have encountered this creature, but believe me, it is not for the faint-hearted, because these things are indeed apex predators, but they are also majestic and beautiful, and some of them are so human-like in their emotions that they can just be almost human. And that's what I felt about this incredible creature. Wow, that really is quite a story. Imagine taking shelter in an igloo with a white Bigfoot. I can't imagine anything more exciting, but also quite terrifying. Until next time, goodbye and good night.